Hey everyone, welcome to Product Momentum. I'm Sean Murray, Director of Product Management here at ITX.
And I'm Dan Sharp, a Product Manager at ITX. It's our privilege to continue the Product Momentum journey, a platform that celebrates the thinkers and doers who are shaping the future of software development.
That's right, Dan. Our goal is to introduce you to industry leaders, innovators, and practitioners, and bring you their insights, advice, and innovations. We talk with experts from product strategy, UX research and design, security, engineering, leadership, and more. We'll discuss how their approaches to problems help empower teams and build trust. And we'll explore trends, tools, and techniques that your team can use to deliver the software solutions your users need today. So tune in, stay curious, and join the conversation.
You can catch us on your favorite listening platform, or if you prefer the video experience, you can find all our latest episodes on the Product Momentum YouTube channel.
And if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share. That way, we can be sure to provide you with the best podcast experience.
Dan, we just got done with Sahil Jain. He is one of the more interesting people that we've ever talked to. Like, he's just an amazing guy. His story is great, but he had an amazing thing to talk about us with today.
Yeah, it really was like kind of a first principles conversation, right? We were focusing on communication, a skill that's critical to everybody, but especially us as product people. We hit upon so many things. We hit upon the importance of stories, the importance of making sure that when we're communicating, everyone's on the same page in terms of expectations, but also that when we're communicating, people understand what we're saying and can kind of repeat back that we're all aligned.
Yeah.
Really fun conversation.
Yeah, it's amazing, like, at a conference like this to, like, talk about a core skill versus, like, the newest things that are happening in product management today. So really unique take. Excited for everybody to hear it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. We are here live at Industry with Sahil Jain. You just gave an amazing talk on communication. So we want to get into that a little bit, but just, I think the audience should know that we are actually sitting down next to, like, the real life Dos Equis, like, most interesting man in the world, right? So, like, your career starts out dropping out of high school, going to Yahoo, working in quality at Yahoo, and now you're just, like, founder of this, CEO of this, CPO of this, like, selling companies all over the place.
Thank you, professional gamer.
Yeah.
That was my favorite job.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
So why communication? You got an opportunity to speak on the Talk Shop stage here at Industry. Why did you focus on this specific topic?
A couple reasons. So we did start a new company recently called Samepage. And our goal is really, the problem we're trying to solve is information asymmetry that exists within organizations. So how can we build technology to keep people on the same page? That's like our big driving motivator or goal. And so communication is obviously a huge part of keeping people on the same page. And it's not communication just between two people, but communication with systems, with information. And so it's a topic that I need to push myself to dig into a few layers deeper. And so I thought, well, if I make that my topic, and I didn't want to talk about our company, I didn't want to talk about Samepage, but I did want to talk about the world, the problem we're thinking about, then I would be forced to learn it even better. And so actually in putting together the presentation, it was really fun and actually frustrating for me, because when you ask people about communication, we all kind of regurgitate the same stuff. And a lot of that stuff is very superficial, right? And it's not wrong. It's just not going to help us get to a solution or get to an improvement. And so by picking that topic of mastering the art of communication, which also coincides with product managers, given a big part of their job is communicating, probably the most important part. It actually just forced me and gave me an opportunity to learn a bit more about the topic and finally feel like I'm sort of figuring it out.
Love that. It's I've been reading a lot about information networks, right? And like how information networks are, right? They're made for efficiently moving data, moving information, but there's nothing that says what's in the information has to be true, right? There's nothing that says that the person on the receiving end has to understand it. Yeah, so I'm curious, like, from what you've learned, how as product managers, can we make sure not just that we're communicating, right? That, yeah, we're sending email, but that the people that we're communicating with have grasped what we're saying, that like, we have a shared understanding.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's challenging. There are various different methods that you can use. It depends on a medium, but I'll give you a few. So, and in fact, I was just at the speaker dinner yesterday and we were kind of talking about this. And in one of the workshops, it came up as well. But one thing is just to ask the person you're communicating with to kind of say it back. And they don't have to just say back the words that you said, but does it make sense? Okay, a lot of us say like, makes sense, and then we move on. But why don't you pause and actually get them to respond? Does that make sense? Now, the other challenge with this, even one of our workshops, there was a great speaker, Sean, and he kept saying, makes sense? And I think half of us nodded because it did. The other half nodded because they didn't want to look
Peer
silly
pressure.
by not nodding. But that's a very real example of what happens inside of a boardroom or inside of a meeting room with various folks that you're communicating with. So one of them is to get them to actually say it back to you. There's a couple other techniques. If you look at the learning sciences, is a really great area of science to look at with respect to information like ingestion, retention, recall, or when you share information. Let's say you're sharing like long form information, like a document. It's important to chunk that information up because there's only so much that we can process cognitively. And so breaking things up into reasonable chunks is very important. I mean, how many of us have gotten that huge email and a lot of times it's important and you want to go through it and you want to look through it because there's a lot of nuance that you don't want to miss. And the problem is like, well, you could say you just throw it into GPT and get a summary out, and that's fine for Spark Notes. But remember, when you go to the test at school
Right.
and they ask you the one thing that was in the Spark Notes, you're like, damn.
Yeah.
So those are some techniques. I think the last thing I just mentioned is, and this is why the introduction of distributed teams and working remote is challenging, is because when you're in person, you can see their cues. You can kind of see if they're tracking. You can kind of sense if they feel uncomfortable with the information or they actually got it.
Right.
So there are certain cues that you can look at beyond just the words that are being exchanged. And you can look at more. I think if you remember upstairs when I was giving the talk, it's like when I'm speaking to you or I'm telling you a message, we're actually both communicating. Right? How you're receiving it, like you're nodding your head, that's communication back to me.
Yeah.
So those are probably some of the like organic sort of tactics that I would use or techniques that I would use, and understanding if the end recipient is really understanding what I'm saying.
You had like four specific techniques that you talked about for like improving communication. And I think the first one was lower expectations. And one of the first things I thought about was also like setting some expectations.
Mhm.
So we had a speaker on the podcast a few months ago, Cassidy Fine. She is the first podcast guest that sent us like a readme of like, here's who I am, here's how I communicate best, right? That sort of thing. And I have taken that back and been like, I think I'm lowering my expectations for everybody else by just not making sure that I don't assume that they know the best way to talk with me. So I make sure that everybody knows that like I am probably the worst guy with email in the world. I think that email should go away. It should just be automated emails and and invites, right? I am a messaging guy, right? So is there some nuance there between like lowering expectations and kind of setting expectations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's always nuance in all of those things. But I do think actually people would, in various like interviews I've had throughout the years, they'd ask like, what's my one piece of, maybe they used to call it wisdom, but I would always say it's always important to set expectations appropriately. So I think with anything, it's super important to set expectations, with communication as well. I think the main point that I was making upstairs was that if you obsess over every single word, that you have to agree with every single word. This is kind of like there's so many different examples of this, like pick the right battles or pick a few battles or pick your own battles, whatever. And I think it's important to remember that the goal here isn't to necessarily like good alignment doesn't mean perfect alignment or that everyone is like acquiescing to what you want. Good alignment is really enough so that you can keep making forward progress in the direction that you actually want to. So to go back to your question more specifically, I think you absolutely should set expectations with communication. In particular, you should like, we spoke about upstairs, we spoke about learning the human that you're communicating with. They also need to learn you, right? So part of your expectation setting would be sharing things like, hey, look, like I tell people I'm a bit more visual. So like if you want to make an impact or if you want me to retain the information, try to bring it visual for me. I'm not going to sit there. I don't enjoy just reading a bunch of text. It's very hard for me to piece it together. So that's a good example of me setting expectations so that we can make that job just a little bit easier, right? We can accelerate. So from that talk, my hope is people can realize like, it's not about, hey, did you read the email? Did you read the email? It's like, did you understand it? Do you want me to deliver in a way maybe that's a little different? Was that the right way that you like to consume information? And this stuff might sound kind of silly, like those are kind of interesting ways of going about understanding your communication with someone, but actually they're super pragmatic and very helpful once you have those conversations.
Right. Feels really important to, and also be flexible. Yeah, meet people where they're at. Um, I mean, I think any of us who've been product people, we've had that moment where like, the developer reaches out like, mid cycle, like, hey, what about this? Like, don't want to bother you. And it's like, no, please. Like, it's really important to me that we're on the same page. Like, ask me these questions. Yeah, so you mentioned, kind of the one-on-one communication, how it's so much easier to kind of get those signals like, hey, you're listening, you understand. Um, how in a group, in that meeting setting, can we make sure that people understand or feel the safety to, get the alignment if they're not understanding, right? We talked about like, the smile and nod because everyone else is smiling and nodding, and I don't want to be the one who asks the question. How do we facilitate that?
Yeah, well, I can give you my approach. So I think I've always admired those leaders in a room where, like, let's say you're in like a boardroom or like investor pitch or whatever. There's always like that quiet, really wise person that like waits before they speak. There's also that person who knows how to engage the others in the room while they're speaking. And so I think that when you're in a group dynamic, you kind of sort of playing quarterback with the information, with the conversation. It's like you're passing the stick around, but you pass it around. Like you say, hey, Maria, like, what do you think about this? And really give people the forum and the platform so that they can share their feedback. Um, and also, this is like another thing about just, I think this is probably more leadership than communication, but like you share your vulnerabilities, what you're unsure about. I talk about being unsure about everything. And I think one of, and my co-founders and I know they've seen this happen, but like in our last business, I had to learn because I started the last business, I think I was like 21 or 22. So I was still like growing up. Um, and I remember that people, for some reason, everyone just kept listening to what I said to do. And I was like, this is so weird. I'm like, I don't, and I mean, this isn't like a humble brag. And someone, I think it was my EA, she was like, Sahil, you're the CEO, obviously. But I thought of myself as like this 22-year-old kid. Like, why are you listening to me? Like, and I'm actually, that's scary to me because I bet my ideas, a lot of them are really bad. So I just want you to have them and think about them, but I don't want you to run with it. So that was another good example too of like in group settings, I would be very mindful to set my expectations and tell people, hey, it was almost annoying. I had to say, hey, this is just an idea. It might be a bad idea. So you don't have to listen to it. But what do you think? And by allowing, especially in that dynamic with like a CEO and like, a marketing manager or something, that did enable them, not every time, by the way. I wasn't like 100% successful with this, but it did enable them to be able to speak up. And like they can see the chinks in my armor and they can see that I'm human just like them. And so I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, you talked about the importance of understanding the context of the people that you're talking to, right? And I think you came up with some like great role-based examples, so I want you to get into that in a second. But like I think what you're talking about is almost like a hierarchy,
Mhm.
right? You need to understand where this person is within the company when you're talking to them, because if you're the CEO, they're just going to listen to you because they don't see you as that 21-year-old kid. Talk to us about like communicating to different roles and like really what's important when either talking to sales or talking to another part of the organization.
Yeah, I think the reason why so Samepage, the product we're building could probably be used by anybody inside of an organization. But of course, as good product people, we're like, we need to limit the scope so we can go a lot deeper. The reason why we're very excited by picking product people as our first kind of set of users is because I've always fascinated by the task at hand for product folks. The job to be done is to communicate out, it's to communicate up, it's to communicate down. They lead through influence, not through direct reports. A lot of that is like around leadership, motivation, and communication, right? All these things kind of play with one another. And so I think with when thinking about product people communicating to different roles, that's kind of what we spoke about. It doesn't, even if it's one-on-one, that's okay. But you have to realize where they're coming from. So I'll give you an example. So the example we used upstairs was sales. And we said that salespeople care about money and deals, increasing deal velocity. And while some people can write it off and say they're just greedy, that's not true, right? That's just like how they're going to bring home, the cheddar for the family. And so as a product person, and the example I think was a good one, and it was helped elucidate the idea for me too, was that when I'm building something, whether it's like I mean, probably not going to send your PRDs to salespeople, but maybe you would take it to a sales meeting, but definitely your release notes. They don't need to be bogged down by a bunch of bugs. They don't, in fact, a lot of organizations say don't send the bugs to the salespeople. I don't know how much I agree with that, but they don't really care as much about that. They care about the stuff that's going to help them close the next deal. So understanding what success is for the role that you're communicating with, and that can be both professional success in their role, but remember they're a human. Maybe they're having a really bad few weeks because of something that happened in their private life. And if you're so fortunate enough that you've been able to learn that information, that's where you can change your approach to how you communicate with that person. You're constantly, and this is why communication is really a craft. It's not some binary thing that you've like got it or you don't have it. So that's probably, I think that's where like the roles come into play, is understanding like what the goal of that role is, but then also remembering that what's that human going through at that given moment, because that does matter in terms of their receptiveness of your message.
Yeah, that's so important, especially for us as product people, right? Like, it's so easy to fall in the trap of like, oh, the service partners, like, they're sending requests at us, right? Like, their negative feedbacks at us, but like, it's not. They also are doing their job, right? Like, they're also trying to get to 5 o'clock to play with their kids, right? Like, we're all people to, we're all working. So upstairs, right? You mentioned the power of stories, and I feel like, in my world, right, user stories is the big thing, and user stories end up being like kind of the meaning's lost, right? It's here's a bunch of words for the development team to do. Um, I love to hear kind of your thoughts on how stories are powerful, how it helps us retain information and be on the same page better.
Sure. Yeah, so this was really fun for me to research. I was actually working with a storytelling team because because communication, I was really worried I would give another presentation about communication that's kind of boring. It's an easy topic to be really boring. Um, and so I wanted to take a couple of different looks at communication. So it's fun because I was working with a storytelling, like a couple friends of mine who used to work at IDEO, which is, they also do great work in terms of like back in the day. I think the baton's been passed to other folks, um, but they're great thinkers. And I remember they really focus on pitching themselves as a storytelling organization. So they've done a lot of research around stories. And that's where that stat around, stories are 22 times more memorable than just like facts alone or information. And you walk through the cognitive reasons for that or the neurological reasons for that. And you realize that like studies have actually done brain scans while you're hearing certain types of information. And you see that when you just hear facts or just like information, only one part of your brain lights up, which is like the language processing region. But when you hear good stories, well told stories, multiple parts light up. That's why like it'll light up memory. And think about it. When someone's telling you a good story, oftentimes, you know what we do? We start thinking about experiences it reminds us of. And so that whole thing is called neural coupling. And what's happening is this idea of like mirrored neurons. So what happens is when you tell a story, you're actually getting the listener to almost experience it with you, not just receive the information. And the thing about stories, and for product people, yeah, user stories are a great example. You have to remember that stories, like structurally, are pretty simple. Like at the simplest, there's a start, a middle, and an end, right? Or you've heard there's a story arc, right? What's the problem? What's the challenge? Like, I think they call it the hero's journey. Like, what's the challenge? What are we going to do about it? How did we overcome it? And that last piece that I spoke about upstairs was the most important part of the story is why do you care? Why should this matter to you? So just remembering that it's not like you have to write out this massive narrative or prose. You can just focus on having a little bit of that like a light narrative of start, middle, and end. And that's like a great first step in the right direction. And then the last thing I'll just mention about this, because I do think this is really important. Like even when I put together this presentation, one really important step when I'm putting together talks is after I have even a long form deck or a long form document put together, I actually bring it back down to a one line, like what section I have, and I'll put a couple words for each of those sections into like an outline. So I'm always going like outline, long form, and then back to an outline as a sanity check. Because when I read those words or like what the sections are about, it should have a narrative. It should have like a sequential narrative. It should make sense. So I think all of those, you can employ that in so many different places. But for product people, sorry, I lied. I'll tell you one more thing. When user stories are a great example, but product people, remember, a big part of our job is influence. Yep. So when you're influencing certain parties in an organization, whether that's the executive team, a lot of what we're doing is like begging, borrowing, and pleading. Stories are a great tool for that. And a lot of, and we've learned this over centuries through like ancient civilizations. The number one way that they pass information through generations is through storytelling, right? Yep. So that was stories for you.
You had one slide up where you talked about like the three parts of a message. There's the sender, the message, and then the receiver, and you had the radio up there. And I could have sworn that you're going to talk about War of the Worlds. So it's like a great example of the wrong message being received, right? That was something funny that popped in my head when you were talking. How did you settle on solving the problem of communication with Samepage?
So, really what happened was we ran a company, my co-founders and I, for 8 years, and then we sold it. And we got ingested into this larger organization. And I became the chief product officer, which I was kind of excited about because I'd spent 8 years being a CEO. And I was like, you get imposter syndrome. And you're like, wow, can I do like a real job? And so I was like, I'll try this. When you get acquired, a lot of times founders check out. They just want to rest and recover. I did eventually do that. But at first, I was like, this is a great opportunity to prove to myself I can do a real role, right? So I took over the product organization. We had product operations to sign, product analytics, obviously my PMs, and then we had about 120 engineers or so that worked with us. And so it was interesting because the example I give upstairs was that every meeting we'd go to, and this was peak COVID, so a lot of meetings. Every meeting I go to, I got so frustrated. Like the wind was taken out of my sails in this like endeavor to become a great chief product officer because we spent every meeting repeating ourselves. Every meeting was catching up like 3 or 4 people. And you can say it's the like incompetence of those 3 or 4 people, but that's like the easy way out. I don't know if it really is. And this is when I started thinking about it. I was like, wow, we have so many tools to communicate. Documents, Slack, email, phone, meetings like Google Meets, and people still aren't getting it. The message, sure, they maybe missed one meeting, but what about the email that I sent? So I was kind of perplexed, and it just actually really annoyed me. And so I had a much longer process in coming up with Samepage. I used to keep this document when I was running my last company called AdStage, where I would just park ideas that would come into my head, and I called the document, I got 99 problems. And in that document, I would just write down one line for any problem I'd come across. And I like B2B, so typically they're business problems. And then if I thought about the problem or if I encountered that problem a few more times, I'd go in and add a few bullet points to that given line item. And then in my various conversations, I promised myself after I sold the business that I would talk to 2 founders or investors per week just to chat. And in those conversations, I kind of like let them know about a few of the problems that are in that document and see if like their ears perked up or not. And then if I would always wait at least 1 year on a given idea. And if after a year, the idea still kept showing its face or whatever, I would then write a whole document around it, which looked kind of like a pitch deck, but in document format. And that would help guide my research. So Samepage, or the premise of Samepage, showed up in that document like 4 times. When I look back at it now and I read, I'm like, oh, wow, that same page, that same page, that same page. So obviously it was something that was like occurring to me as a problem. And sometimes you have to work on a problem that you see. There might be a bunch of other problems around you, but the one that you're kind of attuned to see is important.
Yeah. Upstairs, you talked about repetition and how important that is when delivering messages. You've talked with us about this idea for Samepage at least 2 or 3 times, and the problem that you encountered. And it actually only upstairs while I was listening did I finally remember, like, hey, last year at Industry we interviewed Dan Truparkov, and he is is an AI strategist and futurist, and he said the next big problem that AI was going to solve is like onboarding, getting people up to speed, because all of this stuff exists in all these other mediums, and it's going to need to get brought together. You need to get people up to speed or on the same page, right? So I just thought it was really cool to kind of like hit like that kind of thought has really like manifested into your product based on the problem that you saw at that other company. Right?
I mean, it's really cool. I mean, look, as a startup founder, I think I'm always like nervous about our own product, and that like I know the realities. You can build something great and it may not work, but I do think if I keep working on a problem that I feel, and it's like, finally, I think I'm a reasonable communicator. And so it's kind of fun building a product to help everyone become a good communicator, so to speak. Um, so I think it'll be, regardless of the outcome of the actual business and the products that we build, I think it's a really like valiant effort to tackle that problem space. And then one kind of funny aside that's related, I will give myself credit for picking the name. And I do think it's an incredible name. So good that I'm like, wow, I really want this company to succeed because our marketing is going to be such a slam dunk. Because every time we say same page, you all start using it and you're like, oh, same page. We almost like we try to come up with like synonyms for same page inside of the company because we feel weird using it. I'm like, no, just use it all day. It's great. But yeah, it's a good name.
Just a trademark it.
Yeah. How can people get out and
We did trademark it.
Oh, now we're gonna pay royalties on the pod.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How can people get out and start using it today?
If at Samepage.ai, we have a closed beta going. We're inviting about 2 to 4 PMs per week. We're keeping it really tight because I also don't like it when companies have closed betas and they can't actually fulfill feature requests. The whole idea right now is to really build very closely with our initial users. So for example, if a user asks for a feature on Monday, we'll do our best to get a V0 of that in there by Friday. But the only way we can do that is we keep it kind of small. So, but that being said, we're starting to accelerate and add more people quickly. So if you sign up at samepage.ai, we have one box on that page, which is just to sign up for the wait list. And then you do a demo with one of the co-founders, and then that's it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. The last thing that we normally ask our guests is, what are you reading right now?
Okay, so I have to be really honest. I haven't read a book cover to cover. Well, I hadn't for a while, for like many years. Although recently I did read a few that I got really excited about. One is The Go-Giver, which I think is a super interesting book. Don't ask me, I'm really bad with names, so I'm not going to give you all the author names. And then the other was Marcus Aurelius's Meditations,
Okay.
which I thought was quite good.
Did you read it in the original Latin or?
I absolutely did not.
Well, you brought up Duolingo before, so maybe that's, maybe you got into the Latin too. This was amazing. Thank you so much. One, just for like the really unique presentation on a core skill versus like, here's what you need to do with AI, and like, here's how to lead teams. Just like a very poignant conversation about something that everybody needs. So thank you for that approach. And then thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.